In the quiet suburban stretches of Houston, Texas, the story of a young woman named Rebecca Johnson began long before it turned into a headline of violence and tragedy. Rebecca was born on March 4, 1994, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, into a working-class African-American family. Her parents, Charles and Denise Johnson, were people of faith who believed in the strength of education, hard work, and perseverance. Rebecca grew up with two younger siblings, often taking on the role of the protective and guiding older sister. Those who knew her in childhood remembered her as an intelligent, warm-hearted, and optimistic young girl who dreamed of building a stable future for herself. After graduating high school in 2012, Rebecca pursued higher education in Texas Southern University in Houston, where she studied business administration. College was a transformative time for her. Not only did it offer her opportunities to grow academically, but it also gave her exposure to people from many cultural backgrounds. Rebecca loved diversity, embraced new friendships, and enjoyed learning about traditions outside of her own. Friends described her as open-minded and curious, someone who never judged others quickly but instead tried to understand where they came from. It was during her university years that Rebecca met Ahmed Al-Mansour, a man who would later become her husband. Ahmed was born on August 21, 1988, in Amman, Jordan, and came to the United States in 2010 on a student visa to pursue engineering. Standing tall with sharp features and a reserved demeanor, he often kept to himself in the early days of his college life. Over time, however, he began participating in campus organizations that focused on cultural exchange, where students shared food, music, and stories from their homelands. It was here in 2014 that Rebecca and Ahmed crossed paths. Their first conversations were innocent, discussions about school, American music, and Middle Eastern traditions. Rebecca was fascinated by his background, while Ahmed seemed intrigued by her openness and laughter. Over the months, their bond grew stronger. By 2016, the two were officially dating, despite facing skepticism from both sides of their families. Rebecca's parents were cautious, concerned about cultural differences and whether Ahmed's values would align with theirs. Meanwhile, Ahmed's relatives, especially those still living in Jordan, were openly disapproving. They held traditional beliefs about family lineage and ethnic background, often stressing the importance of marrying within their own community. But love, as it often does, pushed them forward. In July 2018, Ahmed proposed to Rebecca during a trip to Galveston Beach, presenting her with a modest diamond ring that carried more meaning than price. Rebecca accepted with tears in her eyes, envisioning a future built on compromise, understanding, and mutual respect. Their wedding was set for May 25, 2019, held in a modest ceremony at a small church in Houston. Rebecca wore a simple white gown, her smile radiating through every photograph taken that day. Ahmed, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, stood proudly by her side. On the surface, their union was a celebration of love overcoming cultural barriers. Friends and colleagues congratulated them, calling their marriage a symbol of diversity and modern acceptance. But underneath, quiet tensions lingered. Rebecca often noticed that Ahmed avoided introducing her as his wife in certain Arab community gatherings. Sometimes he would tell her not to wear her natural curly hair in public, suggesting it would be better if she straightened it. At first, Rebecca brushed it off as cultural differences, never imagining these small signs would later grow into something darker. The couple settled into an apartment in southwest Houston, near Westheimer Road, a neighborhood known for its mix of immigrant families and working professionals. Rebecca worked as a junior manager at a local retail company, while Ahmed found a position with an oil and gas engineering firm. Financially, they lived modestly but comfortably. Outwardly, they appeared as any young married couple, balancing careers with the early stages of building a life together. Yet, the strain of identity, culture, and unspoken prejudice quietly lingered. Ahmed's extended family in Jordan still disapproved of his marriage, often pressuring him over the phone to reconsider his choices. Some of his friends in Houston questioned why he had chosen to marry a black woman when there were many good Arab girls available. Rebecca, on the other hand, continued believing that love was stronger than prejudice. She was determined to make their marriage work, investing her time, energy, and patience into the relationship. By the end of 2019, however, cracks were beginning to show. Arguments about family expectations, cultural practices, and even the way Rebecca presented herself in public became more frequent. Still, she held on to hope, unaware that the man she had chosen to spend her life with carried deeper resentments that would one day erupt into violence. This was the backdrop to the events that would unfold months later. An American bride in Texas, whose marriage was supposed to be a story of love and unity, but instead turned into a case that shocked not only the local community but also sparked national discussions about race, culture, and hidden prejudice within intimate relationships. The early months of 2020 marked a new chapter in Rebecca and Ahmed's marriage. Living together in their Houston apartment, they appeared, at least to outsiders, to be adjusting well to married life. Rebecca worked long hours at the retail company where she had recently been promoted, and Ahmed often stayed late at the engineering firm. They spent weekends grocery shopping at the local H-E-B, cooking meals together, or visiting the parks in their neighborhood. To their colleagues and casual friends, they were just another young couple finding their rhythm. But inside their home, subtle tensions were building. Ahmed was deeply conscious of how others in his Arab social circle viewed his wife. He worried about judgment, whispers, and even exclusion from community gatherings. When Rebecca asked why he didn't want to bring her to every event, he would dismiss her concerns with vague excuses. "It's just men's business," or "they wouldn't understand your background." Rebecca, who was naturally trusting, often accepted these explanations, though they left her feeling excluded and unworthy. Her own family, meanwhile, noticed the distance. On Thanksgiving of 2019, Rebecca's parents invited the couple to Baton Rouge for the holiday dinner. But Ahmed insisted he was too busy with work to make the trip, urging Rebecca to go alone. She hesitated but eventually declined the invitation altogether, not wanting to cause conflict. It was the first time she missed Thanksgiving with her family, and it left her mother with an uneasy feeling. Denise Johnson later confided to her husband that something about Ahmed didn't feel right, though she couldn't put it into words. Despite these undercurrents, Rebecca remained committed to her marriage. She often spoke about compromise, telling friends that cultural differences required patience and understanding. She believed that with time, Ahmed would soften, and his family would come to accept her. What she didn't realize was that Ahmed's insecurities were intensifying, fueled by pressure from relatives overseas. During late-night phone calls, his older brother reminded him of the shame he brought to the family by marrying outside their race and culture. These words weighed heavily on Ahmed, who had always sought approval from his family back home. By January 2020, Rebecca began noticing sharper changes in her husband's behavior. He criticized her appearance more often, suggesting that she should dress more modestly or look less noticeable in public. Sometimes, his words were laced with subtle disdain for her African American heritage, though he never spoke directly about race. Instead, his comments carried coded language: "You don't understand our traditions," or "Your way of thinking is too American." Rebecca, hurt but determined, tried to bridge the gap by learning more about Middle Eastern food customs, and even attempting to learn Arabic phrases to impress him. Still, nothing seemed enough. The turning point in their relationship came in February 2020, when Rebecca was invited to a colleague's birthday celebration at a small restaurant in Houston. She wanted Ahmed to join, but he refused, saying he didn't feel comfortable being around her co-workers. At the dinner, Rebecca wore her natural curly hair proudly, receiving compliments from friends. One of them posted a group photo on social media, tagging Rebecca in it. When Ahmed later saw the picture, his reaction was cold and distant. He questioned why she didn't present herself properly, and accused her of trying to draw attention. That night ended with silence between them, the first of many evenings filled with unspoken resentment. Outside their private struggles, the world was shifting. By March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic was spreading rapidly across the United States. Houston went into partial lockdown, and both Rebecca and Ahmed found themselves spending nearly all their time inside the apartment together. What might have been an opportunity to grow closer instead magnified their differences. Ahmed grew restless, pacing the apartment, making more phone calls to relatives overseas. Rebecca, on the other hand, tried to stay optimistic, working from home and organizing their small space to make it feel more comfortable. But confinement made Ahmed's frustrations boil over. Arguments became louder, and Rebecca's attempts to de-escalate were often met with cold silence or harsh words. She confided in a close friend, Michelle, over the phone, admitting that she sometimes felt Ahmed didn't truly accept who she was. Michelle advised her to set boundaries, reminding her that marriage should not strip her of her identity. Rebecca listened, but her hopeful nature led her to believe that love could still conquer the distance between them. As spring approached, Ahmed's community pressures became harder to hide. On April 10, 2020, a Friday evening, he attended a small gathering of Arab friends at a cafe on Richmond Avenue. Rebecca stayed home as usual. During that gathering, conversations about marriage and family emerged. Someone jokingly asked Ahmed why his wife never came around. Others questioned him more bluntly. Why had he married a black woman when tradition emphasized marrying within their culture? These comments cut deep, stirring a mix of shame and anger inside him. When he returned home that night, Rebecca greeted him warmly, but Ahmed remained distant. He avoided eye contact and retreated into the bedroom, leaving Rebecca puzzled. Later that week, Rebecca stumbled upon a text message on his phone from a cousin overseas. The message read, "How long will you stay with her? She is not one of us." Rebecca felt her chest tighten as she read the words, realizing for the first time the depth of disapproval surrounding her marriage. Though she didn't confront Ahmed immediately, that discovery planted seeds of doubt and fear in her heart. She began to wonder whether Ahmed's love was strong enough to withstand the cultural and racial pressures he faced. But Rebecca's optimistic spirit still guided her. She believed that if she continued to show patience, respect, and love, Ahmed would eventually rise above the prejudice of others. This fragile balance, between Rebecca's hope and Ahmed's growing resentment, set the stage for the events that would soon unfold. Their apartment in Houston, once filled with laughter and the scent of shared meals, was becoming a space of silence, suspicion, and emotional distance. Behind closed doors, what had begun as a love story was slowly unraveling into something far more dangerous. On the night of June 6, 2020, Houston was unusually humid, even for early summer. Rebecca Johnson had spent the day working remotely, finishing reports for her retail company. By evening, she decided to treat herself to a long bath and a quiet dinner at home. Ahmed, however, had been restless all day. He paced through the apartment, checking his phone constantly, stepping out onto the balcony to take calls in hushed Arabic. Rebecca noticed his mood but, as usual, chose not to push him with questions. She believed giving him space was the best way to avoid conflict. That night, while Rebecca prepared a simple meal of pasta and salad, Ahmed scrolled through social media. It was then that he stumbled upon a Facebook post from one of Rebecca's cousins in Baton Rouge. The cousin had uploaded a family photo from a barbecue held a few months earlier. Rebecca was tagged in the picture, standing proudly beside her family members, her skin glowing under the Louisiana sun, her curly hair free and natural. Ahmed froze as he looked at the image. Something inside him hardened. To him, the photo was not simply a family snapshot. It was a reminder of the truth he had tried to bury. His wife was not just American, she was African American, a reality that his family and parts of his community disapproved of. Although Ahmed had always known Rebecca's background, the visual representation of her family stirred something darker in him. His relatives' voices echoed in his mind, "She is not one of us." Rage, shame, and cultural prejudice collided in his chest. He felt trapped between the love he had once professed and the weight of expectations imposed upon him by his family. When Rebecca called him to the table for dinner, she noticed the storm in his eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked softly, setting down plates. Ahmed didn't answer at first. He stared at her, his jaw tightening. Finally he asked, "Why didn't you tell me your family looked like that?" Rebecca froze. "Looked like what?" she asked, confused. "Like that," he repeated sharply, his voice rising. "All of them, so dark. Why did you hide this from me?" Her heart sank. "Ahmed, I never hid anything. You've met my parents. You knew." "I knew you were American," he interrupted, slamming his fist on the table. "But I didn't know the truth. Not like this. You made me a fool in front of my family. Do you know what they will say if they see this?" Rebecca's hands trembled. She had always sensed his unease, but hearing it spoken aloud cut deeply. "I am your wife. I shouldn't have to apologize for who I am. You married me knowing exactly where I came from." But Ahmed's anger had already crossed a line. His words spilled out like venom, accusations of betrayal, claims that she had deceived him, and insults about her race. Rebecca tried to defend herself, her voice breaking as she insisted on her worth, her love, and her dignity. But Ahmed wasn't listening. By midnight, the argument had spiraled into shouting. Neighbors later told investigators that they heard raised voices, though none imagined the severity of what was happening behind closed doors. At around 12:45 a.m., the confrontation turned violent. In a fit of rage, Ahmed shoved Rebecca against the wall of their apartment's living room. Shocked, she stumbled, pleading for him to calm down. But his anger only escalated. He accused her of humiliating him, of ruining his reputation. Rebecca, frightened but resolute, told him she would not live in fear. She threatened to call her parents and even the police if he continued. That declaration seemed to ignite something uncontrollable in Ahmed. He grabbed her wrist tightly, yanking her toward the bedroom. She screamed, struggling to break free, but his grip was unrelenting. What followed was an assault that would later be described in police reports as severe and sustained. Ahmed's rage manifested in physical violence, leaving Rebecca bruised, bloodied, and in shock. He struck her repeatedly, his voice filled with accusations about betrayal and dishonor. At approximately 1:30 a.m., a neighbor from the apartment below called 911, reporting loud crashes and screams from the unit above. "It sounds like someone is being hurt," the caller told dispatchers. Houston police officers were dispatched to the address near Westheimer Road, arriving at the complex within minutes. When officers knocked on the door, Ahmed initially refused to open it. Rebecca, barely able to speak, cried out faintly from inside. That was enough for police to force entry. Inside, they found Rebecca on the floor, trembling, her face swollen and her clothes torn. Ahmed stood nearby, breathing heavily, his knuckles reddened. Officers immediately restrained him, placing him in handcuffs while medics attended to Rebecca. She whispered through tears, "He did this to me." Those 5 words would become the foundation of the case that followed. Ahmed was arrested at 1:52 a.m., charged with domestic assault. Rebecca was rushed to Memorial Hermann Hospital, where doctors treated her for multiple injuries, including fractured ribs, a swollen eye, and deep bruising along her arms. The triggering incident shocked not only Rebecca's family but also the Houston community. News spread quickly through local outlets once the arrest report became public. The story of an American bride assaulted by her husband after a dispute over her racial identity drew outrage, sparking debates about cultural prejudice, racism, and the hidden dangers in seemingly ordinary marriages. For Rebecca, the night of June 6 marked the shattering of her hopes and illusions. The man she had defended, compromised for, and built her life with had turned against her in the most violent way. And though the assault left physical scars, it was the emotional betrayal, the realization that his love had always been conditional, that would haunt her most. The morning after the assault, June 7, 2020, the Houston Police Department began its official investigation into the case of Rebecca Johnson and her husband, Ahmed Al-Mansour. Officers from the night shift had already filed their preliminary reports. Domestic disturbance, forced entry by police, 1 victim transported to Memorial Hermann Hospital, 1 suspect arrested at the scene. But as details emerged, the case quickly escalated from what some might consider a domestic dispute into a matter that carried larger implications of cultural prejudice and hate. Detective Laura Martinez, a 10-year veteran of HPD's Family Violence Unit, was assigned as lead investigator. She arrived at the hospital that morning to interview Rebecca. The young woman lay in a hospital bed, her face bruised, her left arm in a sling from a hairline fracture, her ribs wrapped in bandages. Despite her pain, she insisted on giving a full account of what had happened. Through tears, Rebecca described the argument that began with Ahmed discovering the Facebook photo of her family. She explained how his anger escalated into accusations about her race, how he called her a betrayal, and how he ultimately assaulted her. Detective Martinez listened carefully, documenting every detail. "You did the right thing calling out for help when officers arrived," Martinez told her gently. "We're going to make sure your statement is heard." Meanwhile, Ahmed was being processed at the Harris County Jail. During booking, he appeared calm, almost detached. When asked about the events of the previous night, he gave a different version of the story. "It was just an argument," he told officers. "She provoked me. She disrespected me." He denied assaulting her with intent to harm, claiming she exaggerated her injuries. But the physical evidence told a different story: Rebecca's visible wounds, the overturned furniture in the apartment, and the testimony of neighbors who heard her screams. By midday, crime scene investigators had collected photographs and physical evidence from the apartment: broken glass near the coffee table, blood on the carpet, and torn fabric from Rebecca's clothing. All of it painted a picture of violence that contradicted Ahmed's claims. News of the arrest began spreading through local media outlets. By the afternoon, KHOU 11 ran a short segment: Houston woman hospitalized after domestic assault, husband in custody. Though the report didn't initially mention race or cultural tensions, whispers quickly circulated in online forums and community groups. Neighbors who knew Rebecca described her as kind and gentle, while others hinted at Ahmed's controlling nature. Detective Martinez and her team worked swiftly. They requested Rebecca's medical records from the hospital to document the extent of her injuries. They also obtained copies of the 911 call placed by the downstairs neighbor. In the recording, the neighbor could be heard clearly saying, "It sounds like a woman is being beaten. Please hurry." That urgent plea, combined with Rebecca's statement, strengthened the case for prosecution. On June 8, 2020, Rebecca's parents drove from Baton Rouge to Houston after receiving the devastating phone call. Denise Johnson wept upon seeing her daughter in the hospital, while Charles Johnson's anger simmered beneath the surface. "We trusted him," Charles told detectives. "We thought he loved her." Their presence added emotional weight to the investigation, as prosecutors prepared to argue not only the physical harm caused but also the psychological and cultural elements behind the assault. The Harris County District Attorney's Office reviewed the evidence and moved quickly to press formal charges. Ahmed was charged with aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury, a felony offense. Prosecutors also considered adding a hate crime enhancement, given the racial undertones in his statements. That decision required careful review, as Texas law demanded clear proof of bias as a motivating factor. Still, the idea lingered heavily over the case. When Ahmed's arraignment took place on June 9, 2020, he stood before Judge Maria Hernandez in a Harris County courtroom. Wearing an orange jumpsuit, he appeared stoic, speaking only to confirm his name and date of birth. The prosecutor outlined the charges and presented evidence of Rebecca's injuries. Ahmed's attorney requested bail, arguing he had no prior criminal record and was employed as an engineer. But Judge Hernandez, after reviewing the severity of the assault and the risk to Rebecca's safety, set bail at $250,000, a sum intended to keep him in custody unless significant financial resources were provided. Meanwhile, Rebecca's story gained traction in national media. Outlets like the Houston Chronicle and ABC News picked up the case, framing it as more than just a domestic violence incident. Headlines emphasized that Ahmed allegedly assaulted his wife after discovering her racial background, sparking heated conversations about racism, cultural prejudice, and gender violence. Civil rights activists in Houston began speaking out, calling for stronger protections for women caught at the intersection of race and domestic abuse. For Rebecca, the days following the assault were a blur of medical treatments, police interviews, and media inquiries. She stayed with her parents at a hotel near the hospital, too afraid to return to the apartment. Her friend Michelle visited often, offering comfort and reminding her she was not alone. Still, Rebecca struggled with waves of guilt and confusion. "How did I not see it coming?" she asked repeatedly. Detective Martinez reassured her that abusers often hide their true nature until control and pressure overwhelm them. Behind the scenes, investigators dug deeper into Ahmed's background. They reviewed his immigration status, his work records, and his ties to family overseas. Phone records revealed frequent late-night calls to relatives in Jordan, some of which coincided with spikes in his arguments with Rebecca. Detectives noted that cultural pressure appeared to play a significant role in Ahmed's resentment toward his wife. The initial investigation, completed within the first week, left little doubt in law enforcement's minds. Ahmed had violently assaulted Rebecca, motivated not just by anger but by prejudice he could no longer suppress. What remained uncertain was how far the case would go, whether prosecutors could prove racial bias as a central factor, and whether Ahmed's defense would attempt to twist the narrative into a mutual argument gone too far. For Rebecca, the path ahead was daunting. The investigation had confirmed her worst fears, that her marriage was not just broken but dangerous. The man she had once trusted above all others was now facing years in prison. And yet, deep inside, part of her still mourned the love she thought she had. The initial investigation had uncovered enough to move the case forward, but it also set the stage for unexpected revelations that would soon surface, truths that neither Rebecca nor the investigators were prepared to face. By late June 2020, just weeks after the assault, the case of Rebecca Johnson versus her husband, Ahmed Al-Mansour, seemed straightforward to many observers. A young bride brutally attacked by her husband, with strong evidence and public outrage backing her story. Prosecutors were confident in the charges, and the community expected justice to follow. But as investigators continued digging, surprising details emerged that shifted the narrative in ways few could have anticipated. The first twist came from Ahmed's legal team. On June 22, 2020, his defense attorney, Mark Feldman, filed motions suggesting that the altercation between Ahmed and Rebecca was not solely about race but also involved financial and personal disputes. According to Feldman, Rebecca had allegedly hidden significant parts of her past from Ahmed, not just her family dynamics, but also debts and unresolved issues that, he claimed, put stress on their marriage. "My client did not attack his wife because of her race," Feldman stated in court documents. "This case is more complex than the media has portrayed." Detective Martinez, skeptical of the defense's angle, dug further into Rebecca's background. She discovered that Rebecca indeed carried about $20,000 in student loan debt, which she had not fully disclosed to Ahmed. Friends confirmed that Rebecca felt embarrassed about her financial struggles, fearing they might disappoint him. While this detail was unrelated to the violence, it gave Ahmed's attorneys ammunition to argue that Rebecca had been dishonest in ways that provoked the conflict. But the real twist came not from financial matters, but from Ahmed's own family communications. Investigators obtained transcripts from Ahmed's WhatsApp messages with relatives in Jordan. In those messages, his brother had pressured him relentlessly, calling Rebecca a mistake, and demanding that he correct his choices before bringing dishonor to the family. One chilling message, dated May 30, 2020, just a week before the assault, read, "If you don't end this, you will not be welcome back here. She is not Arab. She is not for us." When prosecutors reviewed these messages, they realized the case had more than just a domestic violence angle. It carried the weight of cultural coercion and family manipulation. It was not only Ahmed's resentment but also direct pressure from abroad that helped ignite the assault. This revelation complicated the public narrative. Civil rights activists argued that the messages proved racial bias was central to the crime. However, Ahmed's defense team twisted the same evidence, portraying him as a man torn between two worlds, an immigrant struggling under unbearable family expectations. "He was under psychological distress," Feldman argued. "This is not a hate crime. This is cultural conflict, and my client was pushed to the edge." The prosecution now faced a delicate task: how to present the truth without allowing the defense to frame Ahmed as a victim. Assistant District Attorney Karen Lopez prepared her team carefully. "We cannot let cultural excuses justify violence," she said firmly in a strategy meeting. Yes, he faced pressure, but at the end of the day he made the choice to attack his wife. That's the crime, and that's what we must prove. Meanwhile, Rebecca's emotional state deteriorated as new details surfaced. When detectives showed her the WhatsApp transcripts, she broke down. "So all this time," she whispered, "I was fighting for us, but he was fighting against me." She realized Ahmed's resentment was not just personal, it was reinforced daily by voices thousands of miles away. The man she had defended and loved had chosen his family's prejudice over her dignity and safety. Adding another twist, a former co-worker of Ahmed came forward with troubling testimony. The co-worker recalled conversations in which Ahmed expressed discomfort about his wife's background long before the assault. "He once told me he didn't like when she wore her hair natural," the co-worker said. "He said it made him embarrassed in public. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it makes sense." This testimony strengthened the prosecution's claim that Ahmed's actions were motivated by prejudice, not just marital disputes. But it also risked inflaming cultural sensitivities, as leaders in Houston's Arab community worried that the case would fuel stereotypes. Some community members organized statements condemning domestic violence while urging the public not to paint all Arab men with the same brush. By July 2020, as court hearings continued, the case had grown into something larger than anyone expected. It was no longer just about one marriage gone wrong. It had become a cultural flashpoint, raising questions about race, identity, and the invisible pressures within immigrant families. The twist was clear. Rebecca's assault was not simply a personal betrayal, it was the result of a collision between love, race, and cultural expectation. Ahmed was not just a violent husband. He was a man who allowed external prejudices and family coercion to justify cruelty. For prosecutors, this meant they had to fight not only for Rebecca's justice but also against the narrative that culture could excuse violence. Rebecca herself faced the most painful twist of all. She had believed that love could bridge their differences, that patience could overcome prejudice. But the investigation revealed that Ahmed had never truly accepted her for who she was. Every effort she made to adapt, every compromise, every moment of hope, none of it mattered against the deep-rooted bias he carried. The mid-plot revelations transformed the case into a national conversation. What started as a tragic domestic assault had now become a mirror reflecting larger societal issues: race, culture, and the dangers of silence in the face of prejudice. And with trial preparations underway, the stakes for both Rebecca and Ahmed grew higher than ever. By August 2020, the case of Ahmed Al-Mansour had moved from the quiet paperwork of investigation into the high tension of courtroom battles. What had once been whispered in the halls of the Houston Police Department was now openly debated in courtrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms across Texas. The central question lingered: was this assault simply a case of domestic violence, or was it driven by racial prejudice that transformed it into something even darker? Rebecca Johnson, still recovering from her physical injuries, found herself in the middle of an emotional storm. On one hand, she was determined to testify against Ahmed and hold him accountable. On the other, she struggled with flashbacks of the night of June 6th, the pain of betrayal, and the humiliating spotlight of public attention. Her lawyers warned her that the defense would attempt to discredit her, to twist her story into something less credible. "You have to stay strong," ADA Karen Lopez reminded her during preparation sessions. "The jury needs to hear your truth, loud and clear." The trial began on August 17, 2020, at the Harris County Criminal Court. Judge Maria Hernandez presided over the case, her demeanor calm but firm. The courtroom was packed: journalists with notepads, activists with signs outside, and curious locals who had followed the headlines. Cameras were not allowed inside, but sketches and live updates painted vivid pictures of the drama unfolding. The prosecution opened with a stark summary of events: a young bride assaulted by her husband after he saw a photograph of her African-American family. Ada Lopez emphasized Ahmed's words, accusations of betrayal, shame, and dishonor, arguing that they revealed deep-rooted prejudice as a motive. She showed the jury photographs of Rebecca's injuries, played the 911 call from the neighbor, and displayed transcripts of Ahmed's WhatsApp conversations with his family in Jordan. "This was not just anger," Lopez declared. "This was hate, disguised as cultural pressure." When the defense took the floor, attorney Mark Feldman countered with a very different story. He admitted the violence occurred but argued it was the result of a heated marital dispute fueled by financial stress, cultural misunderstandings, and personal dishonesty. "My client was under immense psychological pressure," Feldman told the jury. "He was isolated, judged by his family, and deceived about important aspects of his wife's past. This was not a hate crime, it was a tragic argument that spiraled out of control." The clash between the two narratives created an electric tension in the courtroom. Each witness testimony added fuel to the fire. Rebecca's testimony was the centerpiece. On August 20th, she took the stand, her voice trembling but steady enough to recount the night of the assault. She described Ahmed's words about her family, the way his anger escalated, and the physical blows that followed. When the prosecutor asked her, "Did he mention your race during the argument?" she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes. He said I wasn't good enough. He said I betrayed him because I was black." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. The defense cross-examined aggressively. Feldman questioned Rebecca about her student loans, about whether she had ever hidden aspects of her life from Ahmed, and about the intensity of their marital arguments. "Isn't it true," Feldman pressed, "that you sometimes shouted at Ahmed too?" Rebecca, shaken, responded honestly, "Yes, we argued. But I never hit him. I never hurt him. He hurt me." Her words resonated deeply, countering the defense's attempt to paint the fight as mutual. Detective Laura Martinez also testified, presenting the WhatsApp transcripts in detail. She explained how Ahmed's family had pressured him to end his marriage, highlighting one message that suggested Rebecca was not for us. When asked whether these pressures explain the assault, Detective Martinez replied firmly, "Pressure doesn't excuse violence." He made a choice that night. Outside the courtroom, tensions escalated in the community. Activist groups rallied outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for Rebecca" and "Love is not an excuse for hate." Meanwhile, members of Houston's Arab community expressed frustration, worried the case unfairly painted them as racist or violent. Local leaders released statements condemning domestic violence while urging the public not to stereotype. Inside, the conflict reached its peak when Ahmed himself chose to testify. Against his lawyer's cautious advice, Ahmed insisted on speaking directly to the jury. On August 25, he took the stand, his voice low but deliberate. "I loved Rebecca," he began. "I married her because I believed we could build a life together. But I was under so much pressure, from my family, from my community. I felt ashamed. I lost control." He admitted to striking her but denied that race was his motive. "It wasn't because she was black," he said. "It was because I felt betrayed in many ways." The courtroom buzzed with tension. Some jurors appeared sympathetic, others skeptical. The prosecutor quickly cross-examined, pressing him on his words from the night of the assault. "Did you or did you not say she betrayed you because she was black?" Ahmed hesitated before finally responding, "I don't remember." That hesitation, that crack in his defense, became the turning point. The climax of the conflict was not just the trial itself but the emotional collision of love, hate, culture, and justice. Rebecca sat quietly, watching the man she once trusted try to defend the indefensible. The jury saw not just a husband under pressure but a man who had allowed prejudice to justify violence. As closing arguments approached, the case was no longer just about what happened on June 6. It was about what it represented: the dangers of unchecked cultural bias, the fragility of love when weighed against prejudice, and the resilience of a woman who refused to be silenced. The stage was set for the verdict, an ending that would determine not only Ahmed's fate but also the message this case would send to the community at large. On September 2, 2020, the jury returned to the Harris County courtroom after nearly 2 full days of deliberation. The air inside was heavy with anticipation. Rebecca Johnson sat in the front row beside her parents, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart racing. Ahmed Al-Mansour, in a dark suit provided by his defense team, stood rigidly beside his attorney, eyes fixed on the floor. When the foreperson announced the verdict, guilty of aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury, a wave of emotion swept through the room. Rebecca's eyes welled with tears, her mother clutching her hand in relief. Ahmed closed his eyes, his jaw clenched, while his attorney placed a hand on his shoulder in quiet resignation. Judge Maria Hernandez addressed the courtroom firmly. This case was not only about violence but about the dangers of allowing prejudice and pressure to dictate one's actions. "Mr. Al-Mansour, you chose violence and tonight you must face the consequences." She sentenced him to 15 years in state prison, denying probation or early release eligibility for the first half of his term. For Rebecca, the sentencing was both a victory and a heartbreak. She had fought to reclaim her voice, to ensure justice was served, yet the man she once loved was now permanently severed from her life. "It feels like I lost my husband and my marriage long before the verdict," she admitted quietly to reporters outside the courthouse. "But today I gained back my dignity." The case sparked broader conversations across Texas and the nation. Advocacy groups used Rebecca's story to highlight the intersection of race, culture, and domestic violence, pushing for more resources for women in cross-cultural marriages. Community leaders in Houston held forums to discuss prejudice, cultural pressures, and the importance of protecting women regardless of background. In the months that followed, Rebecca began to rebuild her life. She moved back to Baton Rouge to be closer to her family, leaving Houston and its painful memories behind. With counseling and support from friends, she slowly regained confidence. She later told a local journalist that she planned to finish her MBA and dedicate part of her career to helping survivors of domestic violence. Ahmed, meanwhile, began serving his sentence in a Texas state prison. Though his defense maintained that cultural pressures contributed to his breakdown, the law remained clear. Love could never excuse hate, and no tradition could justify violence. The story of Rebecca Johnson, an American bride who thought love could conquer all, only to face betrayal and brutality, remained etched in the collective memory of Houston. Her courage in speaking out, testifying, and standing firm against her abuser ensured that her voice was louder than the prejudice that sought to silence her. And though her marriage ended in tragedy, Rebecca's resilience became a symbol of survival. Her story reminded many that the fight for justice is never just about punishment, but also about reclaiming identity, dignity, and the power to move forward.